Yeah, okay.
There you
Figured
go.
out how to record 6 p.m. on the dot.
6 o'clock. Are we ready to roll?
So we're ready to go. We're on.
Okay, let's call the meeting to order. We have meeting for July 21st. And our first order of business tonight is to look at the June meeting minutes. Did anybody have any comments or questions or changes to those minutes? If not, could I hear a motion to approve them?
Motion to approve.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Okay, we approved the minute for June meeting. And I think we have the signed copy here for Karen when we're finished. And now we'll go to the public comment. Joanna, do you want to make your introduction?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So, hello, my name is Joanna Bloom and I'm serving as the technical host for this meeting. We'll start with sharing a few slides of the virtual meeting rules that we follow, and I'm doing double duty, so I'll throw those up in just a minute. These rules are in place to find the balance between transparency with community members and security that minimizes disruptions. We need a full name associated with each person's participation in open or public comment, and we're not able to unmute you without it. You can go ahead and let me know what your full name is. If you're struggling to do that, I'll give you my cell phone number here in just a minute, or you can put it in the Q&A. There is no chat feature for this meeting, and the Q&A function is enabled so that you can address any Zoom connectivity issues as needed. As I mentioned, you are welcome to text me if you have any technical issues. My phone number is 303-817-1742. Members of the public may be unable to control the audio or video features. Video is limited to city officials, employees, and invited speakers only. I'll unmute you when you're recognized to speak, and you'll have 3 minutes once you start your comments. And I'll go ahead and try to call names and let you know if you're on deck if we have that many folks. Thank you so much for your participation. So I would invite those that are interested in speaking during open comment to virtually raise your hands right now if you'd like. The controls are generally at the bottom or top of your screen. Do you see one community member that would like to speak? If you're ready, I will go ahead and ask her to talk.
Lynn Siegel, you seldomly answer to any of the things that I bring up. And I bring up the most important things to this community for water. The biggest one right now is that diversion project in CU South. That is unacceptable. $94 million. We're in a deficit now. We don't need more. More is not better here. It's driving up the cost of housing, the cost of homelessness, and the cost of water for human beings to drink, like they don't even have in Gaza. That's what it's going to be like in Boulder. This is unacceptable. That water diversion, groundwater diversion project, huge project that will deplete the groundwater in the adjacent grasslands. And then, guess what? It's more susceptible to flooding, isn't it? What are you doing? Why do you never answer back to me? You know, and why don't you even see my face? Amy can hardly recognize me when I see her around town because she doesn't know who I am. She doesn't see me, except when I go on the water tour, the infrastructure tour. How can you be promoting this kind of stuff in this community that is completely unaffordable and unbelievable? This is water. This is your responsibility. You know what? My name means water. My daughter is a water climate change artist. My brother is a water chemist. Water is everything. Water is life. You all know that. Why can't you even answer to one member of the public? No one ever comes here except me, right? Me and my little black box with my name on it. How insulting. I know it's not your job, but it is yours to talk to the city council and get people's actual faces on the screen. I'm not putting up anything, you know, sex or anything. I'm a member of the public that is interested in water here. And you don't need to see me. You do. You need to see my face. You need to see me on the street. This is utterly ridiculous. And your behavior with preserving our water is disgusting with these projects like CU South. Papilios, 30th and Pearl, Mackenzie Junction, endless high-end housing and cheaper housing that no one wants to live in, so they got to get out of it. That's the demand on open space, right? That's a different subject, right? You're not involved with open space, but you are involved with water. And the more density, what we need is for each person, all the services they use, the most important is water, because you can't live without water. You can't live without water. How can you sit there in those seats and have a conscience and be doing this in your jobs? Be allowing this. You are not exclusive from the planning board and the
And
house.
I apologize that I can't show the timer on the screen this evening, but I did time it on my phone and your 3 minutes is up. If anybody else would like to speak this
And I
evening,
can't afford my bill.
now is a good time to go ahead and raise your hand, either virtually or you can text me at 303-817-1742. I don't see anybody else with a hand raised, so I think I can hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you, Jordan.
Okay.
Let's move ahead. The first item on our substantive agenda tonight is to look back at the CIP, our more detailed discussion.
Sorry, Amy raised her hand. I just saw a hand raised and I was like.
Sorry, I just,
Go ahead, Amy.
I just wanted Lynn to respond to Lynn for a second. You know, I think we do hear, Lynn, we listen when you participate in these meetings. We see, you know, your passion around this topic. You know, I think when I saw you on the street at Bands of the Bricks, you're out of context. And then I recognized you similarly when I saw you downtown and I approached you. You didn't recognize me initially. It was no way intended to be construed as not recognizing you or being rude to you. And I apologize if you took it that way. I certainly don't always immediately recognize everyone at very crowded events. So again, thank you for your passion and your commitment to the community.
You want to respond to all of it? Okay, let's move ahead then. Our first topic tonight is to look back again and to kind of finalize our discussion on the CIP. There have been a few minor changes made, I think, as a result of the discussion that we had a month ago. If the staff would like to sort of highlight that now, then we can proceed to a discussion and ultimately to the public input and vote on that proposal.
Yeah, thanks for that. Good evening, board and members of the public. I'm Joe Tadiucci. I'm the director of the utilities department for the city. We do have a brief presentation tonight here on the capital improvement program. And as we discussed previously, we normally do this in 3 meetings with the board, May, June, and July. This is the third of those. And so in June, we typically do a deeper dive and get the board's feedback and thoughts. And then if we have any changes or any updates based on that feedback, the hope would be that we bring that back tonight. And after some discussion and a public hearing, we would ask the board for a recommendation. And so Steph Klingeman is our principal financial analyst. She'll lead the brief presentation tonight, and with assistance and support from Chris Douglas, who oversees our engineering and capital projects team. So before I turn it over, just for clarity, what's being asked of the board is a recommendation to council on the 2026 CIP and associated utility rates. We do show you a 6-year window for context, but it's just the next year that you're making a recommendation on. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Steph.
Thanks, Jim. Good evening. Thanks for being with us tonight. So as Joe mentioned, the goal tonight is to provide any additional clarity on our priorities, projects, rates, and associated impacts that will enable a final recommendation. Following the information I share, we'll pause for any clarifying questions, and then move to the public hearing portion of the meeting, and then end with wrap deliberation on the motion and recommendation. So I just quickly wanted to recap what we discussed in June. So we discussed capital prioritization and the need to sometimes adjust the timing of capital projects. These adjustments do allow us to optimize our financial planning and better align with our operational priorities. We also spent time reviewing our financial strategies, specifically how we manage our reserve funds. As we discussed, our reserves help us absorb unexpected costs, smooth out the impact of large capital projects and rate increases, and they also keep our cash flows stable. In terms of fund management, we monitor key indicators like our days cash on hand and the debt service coverage ratio. Keeping these metrics healthy not only ensures financial stability, but also positions us more favorably when we go to the bond market. And then looking ahead at how we'll finance upcoming capital projects, our approach will depend on a mix of available cash, market conditions, and our financial standing at the time. We are planning to bond this year to support the South Boulder Creek project. And longer term, we may also look at bonding in 2028 or 2029 for some of our water and sewer projects. And then finally, the last meeting, we did touch on our projected 8% annual rate increases forecasted in the water fund and whether they're enough to address the sizable capital backlog. STEP does recognize that the backlog is significant, but current rate projections are appropriate in our opinion. We do plan to perform a deeper review of the long-term financial plan to anticipate, further capital needs and make sure that funding and staff are aligned. So these are the recommended rates from last month. We are recommending an 8% increase in our water fund, a 6% increase in our wastewater fund, and a 5% increase in our stormwater and flood fund for next year. And then we have projected rate increases for 27 and 28, 8% for the water and wastewater funds, and then a 7% for the stormwater and flood fund. And then Steve, I think this gets at your question, some of the capital improvement project timing shifts. So we do have a handful here. I think the most impactful is the Patasso project. So we are moving that up a year to align with our planned debt issuance that we have forecasted in our 6-year forecast. We are deferring the design and construction standard update, which is a shared project with transportation, and that's about $500,000 across all utilities funds. We are planning a utilities cost of service and rate study for next year, and we budgeted $110K for that. The Chautauqua Infrastructure Improvement Project, that's a coordinated effort between utilities and other departments of the city that is currently underway. And we've added project funds in the water and storm and flood fund. And then finally, we did reduce the bonding need for 2029 in our wastewater fund from 69 million to 54 million. Just looking at the cash flows, we were able to cash fund more of those projects than we originally anticipated. So with that brief summary, we wanted to open it up to the board for any clarifying questions. Feel free to ask about the proposed capital improvement program and the associated rate increases.
Can you give us a little bit more detail on that rate study that you added in? What is it geared towards and
It's
what's the time span?
The time frame for it? Yeah, it's a great question. So right now, we are working on developing a request for proposals with the
with the goal of issuing that hopefully by the end of the year. And it's really to look at all three utilities, our capital planning, and really a comprehensive in-depth look at all of the rates that we charge across the board. So it would include user fees, it would include our plant investment fees. And the intention is to hire an outside consultant to take a look at that.
That involve any kind of survey of the public, or is that just sort of contrasting to other cities, or?
Yeah, so it's going to first take a deep look at our finances and, you know, allocate cost to the different types of rates that we charge. There is a public outreach element, and there will also be a benchmarking component to that as well to other utilities in the Harris County.
Yeah, and if I can add to what Steph said, thanks for that, Steph. Rate studies are something that municipal utilities do every so many years. I think the last one we did started in 2016 and completed in 2018. It's a lot of it has to do with just the formulas and things that we use to charge for our services. At the end of the day, we use a cost of service model. We have to know what our costs are, and then we have to generate enough revenue to pay for that. And I think we implemented a water budget rate structure back in 2008. And we've learned a lot from that along the way. And so there's a couple of phases of that and some things that we want to look at as staff with a goal of maybe simplifying. So we're in the time cycle, we're kind of due for an update anyway, and there are some things we haven't.
So it's really more of a effort to review how you calculate and set the rates than it is sort of a public input or a comparative benchmarking type of.
It's an opportunity for public input. I would say this time around, our commercial customers are really of interest and wanting to work with them and come up with something that's hopefully simpler and easier to understand. The last time we did a rate study, an example of the way we calculate stormwater fees, and when we look at properties and the amount of physical impervious or pervious area, some of our larger property owners pointed out in terms of public feedback, some inequities in the way that we were doing that. And it actually had influence and changed the way we structured the charges. So there's absolutely the opportunity for the public to weigh in on that.
Other questions, comments from the board?
Yeah, so the proposal, I guess it's not a proposal, because it's just in the planning, that the wastewater and stormwater rates would go up in 27 and 28. Or the rate of increase would be higher than the increase scheduled for 26. I'm just wondering, can you comment on that and
Yeah.
why that's not being done? 26.
Sooner. So for the wastewater fund in particular, we do have a bump in our capital spending after this year. So that does, you know, we would really like to increase rates next year when we really need that additional infusion. And then for the storm and flood fund, I think we will take a closer look at that next year. We had, in looking at our audited financials for last year, we were really close on our debt service coverage ratio of hitting that 2.0 times, which we talked a little bit about last time. And just making sure that, you know, we are kind of staying in that 1.75 times to 2.0 times debt service coverage ratio mark. It's looking pretty good right now, and especially with that 7% increase, it would allow us to stay a little bit above that. So I think we'll just need to really see where our rate revenues come in next year for the storm and flood compared to some of our operating expenses. And then we may adjust that back. But I wanted to put the 7% in there just to be a little bit more conservative.
So the wastewater one sounds more likely to happen.
Yes.
Stormwater, you just have to kind of see how.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And these are projections, right, for next year. So we'll just have to take a really a closer look next year once we get to the 2027 rates.
Okay, and that money for the wastewater is obviously not needed in 26, that increase, if it's not, if nothing, yes.
The 6% should be sufficient for next year.
Any questions? We had one question. Can you kind of summarize for us? It might even be interesting to see this in sort of a chart, but summarize for us the various major bonding efforts that you foresee over the next 3 or 4 years and tie them to the individual sort of the big, the big projects that they're funding, just so we have a better summary kind of view of when those big ones will hit, or what could delay them, or what might, what could delay or accelerate those major bonds.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder if it'd be helpful to pull up the attachments. I could do that quickly.
While staff is doing that, one of the projects that we have that's in the current budget year, 2025, I think there was a question last month about the South Boulder Creek Flood Project. It's I think in the public comment, it was referred to as being a $94 million project, which is incorrect. It's actually a $66 million project. And that is one that we're bonding for. And it's currently in the middle of litigation. So some of the plaintiffs who oppose the project have taken legal action. And so until that is fully cleared up, the bonds are on hold.
Absent that, at what point would you be planning to issue that bond? From an operational sort of perspective.
We already would have, we're going through the final permitting process right now. And also going through the bidding process, and on large projects like this, we manage all of those activities and are doing things concurrently with the hopes that they'll complete around the same time. And so at the point that you go through the construction bid process, when that gets to completion, before a city can award a project like that, you need to have the funds in hand. And so when we get to that point, if it's not resolved and if we haven't gone through the bond sale process, it'll delay the project.
And the project could be delayed.
So I did go ahead and I pulled it up. So we have about $26 million in our transmission system. And Chris, feel free to hop in here if you want to provide any details. And then in our source water system, we have a $35 million project for Barker Dam. So those are the two major projects in the water fund. And I can go to the wastewater fund unless you want to add anything.
And just some more specifics on those projects. And again, good evening, I'm Chris Douglas, the Utilities Engineering Manager, but for the transmission lines, we have a series of pipelines like the 63rd water line that we looked at a few months ago, to where we're teeing those projects up and continuing that momentum. And that specific project is some work that we need to be doing with the transmission lines along in the area of Broadway between Table Mesa and Baseline. So it's a really significant high impact project. And then with the Barker Barker Dam Outlet Works project it's the 100-year-old outlet works gates that we're planning on rehabilitating to allow us more flexibility to take water out of the Barker Reservoir for both water supply and also some water quality uses. So that's why we're teeing up those large projects that lead to some bonding. And really what we tried to do from the bonding perspective is we bond the water and the wastewater fund together. But they're still separate financially, but we try to package those larger projects in concurrent years for bonding.
And will that be the 28-29?
That would be the 28-29, correct. And that was even where Seth had talked about moving some of the the Paso project work. We'll move that up a year, looking to try to combine that with the bonding of all of those other projects as well.
And on the wastewater side, at the work, we have the temperature regulation compliance project forecasted for 29. And then we do have some work in the collection and conveyance system. Specifically, I think the last phase of the MSI and then the Arapahoe truck service.
So again, continuing with those large diameter pipe projects, that really those are the things that serve almost the vast majority of the community in their individual sections. So that's why we're trying to advance those projects, because really they're doing they're serving the greatest amount of people and how we're evaluating them.
So as far as bonds, we've got South Boulder Creek, this 28-29 one, and then from there, is it just sort of assessing? We don't right now. Right now, that's all we have forecasted.
Are there any kind of financial or operational constraints or issues that would drive you to bond for water and wastewater or floodwater projects together or separately, or what drives that decision?
And then specifically between water and wastewater and storm flood is just because they're different entities. And that's really why we're bonding differently in the storm flood utility versus the water and wastewater utility. And traditionally, we've combined water and wastewater bonds and that's really what the bond market has seen from us. I'm looking at Stephanie, making sure I'm getting right, because I'm stepping into the financial world so a little bit too much.
Yeah, historically, we've bonded with water and sewer together, but that's not to say that we couldn't bond separately. We've also issued sewer bonds without issuing water bonds. And actually, the way that I have it forecasted, because we have more water projects front loaded in the CIP, we've got more projects in 28 for water. I actually have two separate bonds. If you look at the attachment, so there's a 28 bond for water and there's a 29 bond for sewer. And then storm and flood has just historically been bonded separately. I think part of the reason is because right now we just have one outstanding bond issue for our storm and flood fund. It was a 2015 project, so we haven't historically bonded there.
And maybe even the bigger effort on bonding is we're trying to limit the times that we go out to the bonding market. One, it's a big lift from a staffing, but then also the bond market likes to see that we're planning ahead and we're not going out to the bond market year after year after year. There's this level of planning and stability that really, that's one of those things that does go into a really favorable AAA bond rate.
What are the bond rates typically?
So last year when we bonded in 2024, when we bonded for the water and sewer, it was about 3.8%, which is pretty favorable.
So I'm just sort of one question, but I'm just curious, what are the risks, particularly for 26, go wrong with being followed, or keeps you up at night kind of questions?
We've got a lot of stuff, and we have a lot of projects where we sit and make we are making difficult decisions as to which project to advance first. So there's risk everywhere, and so you get into that. Is that any one particular thing? No,
Yeah.
But it's more along the lines of I think, as Joe has said a lot, is the infrastructure doesn't care what our plan is. And so it's that other project that is, maybe it's 2 or 3 things down on the list that we'd like to get to, but from that overall aspect of between staffing and public coordination and funding that we can't quite get to yet. And so it's that trying to have that balance. And so there's not one specific thing, it's just more along the lines of, okay, if we have to pivot, we can pivot a lot to doing something new. But these projects that we're doing are long scope, multi-year projects to be able to plan and coordinate. So it's that, frankly, it's, or maybe the other end of that, Member Smith, is that, it's not making a decision and not advancing a project because we've got lots of things. That's probably the scarier thing, is we're overanalyzing or not committing to advance things because they take so long. So we need to keep that forward progress and, you know, frankly, get one more thing off of the list where we can turn around and start doing the next thing. Because we are in the foreseeable future, we have many years of hard and difficult projects to do. So we need to keep advancing.
I would echo what Chris just said. I think for me, it's not a specific part of our infrastructure that I'm worried is going to fail. I think the team is just the way they're looking at everything holistically and planning. We're not approaching the point where that's the concern, but if we don't have an overall long-term plan, and if we don't keep up with the funding, we can get to that point. And have appreciated the board and council support of the plans that we put forth since I've been a city employee.
More of a general comment, but I think, given what you just said, I think last week we asked a lot, or last month we asked a lot of like, is this enough? Can we fund these projects? And I do just want to call out the flip side of that. I think this year especially, it is a tough time for folks and thinking about the rate increase. And I just want to say, I appreciate you all said, like, this is enough, we can get what we need done with this and stuff. I think the number in here was a little over $9 a month is the impact to the average monthly bill. And so just recognizing what Joe, you just said, infrastructure doesn't care what our plan is. I think balancing that with the impact to people, and just really appreciate, I think, the perspective you all have taken on understanding it's a tough for folks, but we also want to live in a city with water. So more just a general comment of thank you for.
If I can just comment on that, for the board in the past, the bill assistance program, so that there's a safety net for people who are having trouble paying, has been a really important thing. Shared principle with staff as well. That is a work plan item that helps with that balance.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, I guess we can move on to the public input. And I have you want to go.
And has our hand raised real quickly.
Sorry, I did want to just go back to the rate study question and sort of riffing on what Katie's talking about when it comes to the rate structures and balancing, incentivizing different behaviors through rate structures that encourage conservation, but still we end up having sufficient revenue to cover the investments and the operations and maintenance of the system. And so I hope that when we go through the process with the rate study, there's an opportunity to consider both that necessary behavioral change for our long-term water planning around conservation, and then the affordability concerns. That's it.
That's a perfect tee up for the item that's coming after this. No, definitely hear that, and for sure that'll be a factor when we do the rate study. We need the revenue to pay for the infrastructure and to keep up with it, but we also want to encourage wise water use, and it's a tricky thing to balance.
Great, I do
Okay,
think,
thanks.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
Are you okay? Do you want me to
Yeah.
facilitate? Okay, so I do think we have an opportunity to provide public comment for folks to provide public comment on the CIP item, if you would like. Just similar to open comment, we will go ahead and have you raise your hand virtually if you'd like to speak, and we'll set a 3-minute timer. If you would like to comment on the CIP, I'll give you just a minute. Okay. I do see one community member, Lynn Siegel, would like to speak. Lynn, I will go
Right
ahead and
now,
try to. Thank you.
Twice as much water as I normally would. You'll be disturbed to hear that, Amy. And this is because the city of Boulder offered me this free $55,000 energy improvement to Excel Energy for them to go more electric. So now my hot water is so cold that I have to warm it up with my gas stove. I can't get myself clean or get my clothes clean with the water this cold from the water project that they put in, which was a air source heat pump hot water heater, which is a joke. Do not get one unless it's out in your garage or in a sequestered area, because it makes a huge loud noise that drives you crazy. So people like you have to be dealt with on this board. Seriously, this is not tolerable for people. I'm 72 years old. This is elder abuse. That's what this is. And my bill going up constantly, and it's all for the stormwater and floodwater and other issues. I know that, but you know what? You are an important bill. $9 I cannot afford. I'm sorry, I cannot afford that. This is my kid's future. I haven't gone to a movie in 40 years. Everything I spend it's nothing. Food, I get food stamps. Everything is for my kids for climate change. Everything is for them because I can't anticipate when hopefully, they outlive me. But these projects are ridiculously expensive, and they're to fuel, and it's true what folks are saying, that it's the infrastructure that's the expense. Conservation is no big deal. It's no big deal that I'm using more water because of the city of Boulder's energy project they put in my place that I won't even use, that I don't even use except for my hot water I needed, but it's not warm enough. This is an insult. And this is because with the county, when I did a retrofit 10 years ago, my contractor was dropped, and I asked why, and they wouldn't tell me. And I found out that it was because this county was forcing them to do a solar project under adverse conditions and violate their warranty and be subject to damages. This is not how a county runs. This is not how a county that's giving me a retrofit system is going to run. I'm not going to use them. You bet. And then they gaslighted me when I come for a free one because it's affordable, my unaffordability allowed me to get this stuff. They gaslighted me and sequestered me from my project. I can't even use any of the stuff they put in here. It's unbelievable.
Okay, thank you, Len. Your time is up. If anybody else would like to speak, you may indicate so by raising your hand virtually on the screen. Give it just a second.
I guess I would just note here that we're trying to have a availability of public input on the CIP. And for next year, not just general commentary.
Yes, I don't see anybody else.
Okay. Well, I think it's time to move on to if no other discussions or questions on the board. I think it's time for us to move on to put together a motion to approve the plan. And we actually have, we need to do this in two parts because Amy is involved with a employed by a company that does have some work with the city, and so we split the motions into two parts so that she can use herself from that part that involves your company. And have you all looked at the motions that we put together and the staff put together? Do we have any questions or comments about those, or changing the wording or intent of either of those motions? If not, then I think we can go ahead and vote on those, and I would ask for a motion on the first one as we see it on the screen here. Second. Okay, we need to read this out loud maybe for the public.
I think so.
Okay. The first motion then would be the Water Resources Advisory Board recommends approval of the Albion Dam 2022-26 project, Barker Dam work 2024 to 2032. The Worth phosphorus treatment improvements 22 to 26, and the Worth HVAC improvements 2025 to 26. In the 2026 to 2031 CIP for the water and wastewater utilities. Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay. We'll go on to the second motion then. This motion reads, the Water Resources Advisory Board recommends the City Council approve the 2026 capital improvement program for the remaining projects in the water, wastewater, and stormwater and flood management utilities, including proposed rate adjustments to support 2026 revenue increases of 8%. Water utility, 6%, wastewater utility, and 5% in stormwater and flood management utility. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Makes sense. Motion passes.
Thank you, appreciate that vote, and I think for the record, the first one passed 4-0 and the second one 5-0.
Okay. The next item is an information item from staff on the water supply planning as part of the comprehensive plan, and I'll turn that back to Joe and staff for that presentation.
Well, thank you. Yeah, as you just said, Board Member Maxwell, this is an item on our water supply planning relative to the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan update. It's a big update that's a multi-year process. And the comprehensive plan involves a number of policy items, including some of which are related to water. So for tonight, this is an information item only. It's not a public hearing. And we're not asking any formal action from the board, but we've got a presentation and opportunity for the board to ask questions or provide any informal feedback afterwards. Our hope with the written information that we provided and the presentation that we'll go through tonight, that you leave with a decent overall understanding of what our situation is. Crystal will lead the presentation here and you see a number of different scenarios that we've looked at. And we will likely be coming back to you in the future as part of the comp plan process to discuss more specifically policies with you related to water supply. And I'll just an editorial comment from me on this. We won't be able to get into the depths of it tonight, but this one of the really cool things about working with the water utility in the city is just the technical, scientific climate change information and how we have integrated with our water supply planning, actually embedded it into the modeling so that we can see the effects of that. And so you'll see some of a summary of that here tonight, but it's pretty cool stuff in my opinion. So we have Kim Hutton here, who is Senior Water Resources Manager in our Utilities Department. Crystal Morey is a Senior Engineer in Water Resources, and online I believe we also have Layla Parker, who's a Senior Project Manager in Water Resources. Crystal will lead the presentation tonight, and with that, I'll turn it over to Crystal.
Awesome. Good evening, Rob. Excited to join you all again. With the background Joe's provided, I'll just dive right in. Tonight, we'll go through a lot of detailed information on the city's current comprehensive plan update, Boulder's projected water availability out into the future, and future development of an integrated water supply plan. Please hop in and ask questions as they come up, and I'll also pause at some good stopping points for questions as well. To kick off, the comprehensive plan is an aspirational plan that's collaboratively developed with the city and county that describes our community's long-term vision and goals for lands in and around Boulder. It identifies policies that inform how we provide our services over the next 20 years or so. And our last major update to the comprehensive plan was in 2015. The comprehensive plan update process kicked off late in 2024 to begin gathering information on current conditions and developing a shared understanding of community vision and priorities. The plan development is currently in the policy options and preferred direction phase. And the comprehensive planning team will be joining us in September at the RAB meeting to gather feedback from RAB on priorities related to water issues and trade-offs among competing priorities. And they'll rely on your feedback when developing proposed land uses and other policy changes in the comprehensive plan. And then they'll come back to you all in Q1 of 2026. The focus of the comprehensive plan is really land use, but water and land use planning are inherently linked. So utilities has been actively involved in the comprehensive plan update. For example, brand new development increases overall water demands, and things like high density housing and water-wise landscaping can lower water demands per person. Direct outcomes from the plan will include a land use map that dictate how and where development can occur, and also population projections that help indicate when development will occur. And both of those things inform a wide variety of utilities planning, like water and wastewater treatment capacity, conveyance capacity needs for water coming into and out of the city, and water supply needs. For example, if zoning maps in East Boulder change from light industrial to mixed use or high density residential, then water demands will presumably increase. Utilities would then be interested in whether a transmission or distribution line needs to be resized to meet those demands. The comprehensive plan's high-level lens also provides the ideal opportunity to appropriately weigh trade-offs and establish clear guardrails. Common utilities trade-offs include affordability, level of service, and the built and natural environment. For example, is infrastructure required to increase our level of service worth decreased affordability for ratepayers? Finally, the comprehensive plan can identify specific strategies to carry out the community vision, such as changes to codes and design standards, plans, fees and rates, or capital expenditures. For example, we're currently working on a water-wise landscape code improvement, and we'll report back to you all about that in September. And if there was another area of codes or designs that we felt needed to be updated, we could identify and prioritize that need in the update to the comprehensive plan. To zoom in just a bit closer on how the comp plan relates to water supply planning, the comprehensive plan informs master plans for all three utilities: water, wastewater, and storm and flood. And that water utility master plan informs both the treated water master plan and the source water master plan. Boulder's future water supply planning efforts have largely been governed by our 2009 source water master plan. Given the document's age, we recommend any significant shift in the community vision outlined by the comprehensive plan be carefully studied through the development of an integrated water supply plan. And an integrated water supply plan is the new standard for a source water master plan and more holistically considers supply and demand and the uncertainty tied to both. Many other cities like Colorado Springs, Aurora, and Greeley have recently developed integrated water supply plans. RAB will be actively involved with the development of an integrated water supply plan after the comprehensive plan is complete. And this is a good place to stop if you have any questions about the comp plan.
How was the, sorry, my fault, how was how were the previous plans not integrated? How this is truly, if you, I understand it's supply demand, or you could elaborate a little more.
Yeah, more historical water supply planning used to be very focused on how much supply do we have to meet a very conservative demand projection.
Okay.
Under like a very assumed this is the exact future that will exist.
Okay.
But now we have a lot more climate change uncertainty and we know we can leverage water conservation more. So an integrated water supply plan can balance those things a little bit better.
So you could look at different scenarios, different outcomes, different response options. Okay.
To provide just a little bit more context for our more focused water supply planning discussions tonight, I wanted to introduce you to the Colorado Water Plan. This is a planning document that estimates a range of water futures by 2050 and develops statewide actions to mitigate anticipated water supply gaps. Because there's significant uncertainties tied to areas like climate change, growth, and social values, the Colorado Water Plan uses a scenario planning approach that focuses on a plausible range of futures rather than trying to predict one single future. For the South Platte Basin, which is the basin Boulder's located in, the Colorado Water Plan projected a gap of 500 to 800,000 acre feet per year by 2050 across scenarios. This is around 30 to 50 times Boulder's current water demand, or around 2 to 3 times Denver's water demand. Boulder also uses a scenario planning approach, and we've prepared 4 scenarios for you this evening that encapsulate a range of plausible futures out to 2050. This timeframe is similar to the planning timeframe of the comprehensive plan, but typically long-range water supply planning is done on a 50-year time horizon. We really need to develop an integrated water supply plan to thoughtfully evaluate the impacts of any comprehensive plan changes. But we've prepared some analysis to help inform you all of our current risk profile and future trade-offs. So here are 4 scenarios that represent plausible ranges of futures. The optimistic and severe scenarios represent more extreme bookend scenarios, whereas the continuing trends and stress scenarios are more moderate projections. Our first future scenario is an optimistic one, where warming is less severe and doesn't impact our water supplies much. Continued trends assumes climate change results in the Colorado Front Range as a whole, including Boulder, beginning to experience minor reductions in water supply. Stressed assumes the Western United States experiences significant water stress, and that stress sparks policy changes on the Colorado River that reduce water supplies available to Colorado as a whole and Boulder's Colorado River supplies. And the last scenario is more pessimistic in nature and assumes intense warming that has a detrimental impact on regional water supplies. A severe scenario would really fundamentally alter our relationship with water, not just Boulder, but the entire Western United States. So for these 4 scenarios, we've identified 4 primary drivers, 2 of which represent supply-focused drivers, and 2 of which represent demand-focused drivers. For the climate-driven streamflow changes range from around a 10% increase in an optimistic future, all the way down to around a 30% decrease in a severe future. This range helps articulate how much future water supply uncertainty all Colorado communities are dealing with. The first 3 scenarios encapsulate the extent of climate change risks identified in the Colorado Water Plan. And then the 4th scenario exceeds the severity included in the Colorado Water Plan. For Colorado River impacts, as you all know from Northern's discussion with us in April, there's significant unknowns as to how discussions currently happening at the 7 states and federal level may impact Boulder specifically. So with these extreme uncertainties in mind, under 2 out of the 4 scenarios, we're assuming water stress under the Colorado River won't be significant enough to trickle down and directly impact Boulder's water supply, or there'll be mitigation projects that we could participate in. Under the other 2 scenarios, we do assume climate change will invoke enough water stress to result in moderate and major decreases to Boulder's Colorado River supplies. For the demand-focused drivers, climate-driven irrigation changes recognizes that crops on a farm and our urban landscapes both need more water to survive and thrive as the temperature increases. There's a scientific relationship between temperature, precipitation, and plant water demand that's been used to determine a range of anticipated increases in irrigation demands from moderate to major. And finally, additional water conservation recognizes increased water scarcity, motivation and uptake of water conservation strategies would also increase. Water conservation achievements to date are already considered across all future scenarios. Under an optimistic and continued trend scenario, we'd anticipate increased efficiency, largely tied to indoor water fixture replacements. This is the level currently contemplated by our water efficiency plan. And as water stress worsens from stress to severe, we assume water conservation efforts would ramp up to things like large-scale direct payment for water-wise landscape conversions, system-wide capital improvements to reduce distribution system losses, and real-time customer metering. Anything greater than that minor savings would require significant capital investment to support. So I'll get to the results shortly, but do you all have any questions before I hop into those results?
You mentioned that Boulder can participate in mitigation projects depending on like the outcomes of the Colorado River negotiations in scenarios. You said 3 and 4. Do you know, or do you have examples of what those mitigation projects?
We have not been approached regarding any sort of mitigation projects, and often Northern Water is involved in those types of conversations.
Okay.
So one question, well, it's 2 questions. So when you're talking about those reductions in Colorado flow, I think it's 10 and 30%, are those by 2050?
Yes, these are all projections out to 2050.
So I'd be curious, I don't know what happened, like what exactly the nuts and bolts to the climate scenarios might have fit. Done all work and it's curious if there is some backup material, something not that. So you see that. And then a question on the water conservation that can be independent of the climate scenario. We could push those levers if we wanted to, regardless, even without climate drivers, right?
With water conservation, can you remind me what the split is between lands like external use and then internal use?
Yeah, I think it's about 55% outdoor presently and 45% indoor.
And in the first 2 scenarios, we'd really be so focused on indoor.
Correct.
What are the sources of information or the statistical databases or whatever that you use to calculate the climate effects? I mean, what information is going into those decisions or those calculations?
A big component of it is we're using I was gonna say CMIP, so they're global climate models that the science community is using. And so we're not designing any of this ourselves. We're taking existing modeling information, model output data, and running that through our own system models. So basically the data that's out there for climate change, there's say 200 some model runs or climate models that are available that have been looked at by a lot of it's the Bureau of Rec, and they've kind of processed that information. They're kind of applicable to the water industry. And then we take those, they talk about changes in temperature, changes in precipitation, on various timescales, and so we use the precipitation and temperature data in our models to see how the stream flow would be affected in Boulder, how water demands might be affected.
Those are broken down into pretty small geographic areas or.
Yeah, you can, again, it's not work that we do, but that data can be downscaled to, geez, I think it's, yeah, I was gonna say like, it's, I think we've got a few in the Boulder Creek area. I think there were maybe 3 or 4 grids, I would say.
So this is the view rec downscaling data. Yeah. Right. Do you know, since we're diving into weeds, one of the issues is the climate scenarios. They're typically referred to as RCP. Well, we don't get into what that means, but do you happen to know which the typical ones are 4.5, 6.5, 8.5, you know, and or you can get that information.
Yeah, it's. Our climate change scenarios aren't directly comparable to RCP 4.5 or 8.5.
Okay.
But we did link a 2019 report in your all's memo that goes through the detail of those assumptions. And in particular, our climate scenarios are consistent with the methodology used for the Colorado Water Plan. And they did a study in 2019 that evaluated climate change scenarios less on temperature and precipitation and more focused on stream flow impacts and irrigation demand impacts, and grouped those climate scenarios based on that.
And the point of these scenarios is to come up with different set of scenarios that we can look at in terms of generating options to address potential futures and strategies and recommendations around addressing in terms of the way that we're managing our system. And like when I think of an integrated plan for water supply, that means we're not just like, here's our water supply group looking at our traditional sources of water, but we're thinking about our water and our stormwater and our wastewater, and we're looking more comprehensively at what all of our water moving through our system looks like. Is that, maybe that's where you're going, but I'm just getting interested in kind of how this is going to build out into more of that integrated planning.
Yeah, I think so. Ultimately, what we're trying to do, like Crystal said, is like, what is a range of possibilities? And you can't plan for just one future, but it's more like more information is power, right? So we know maybe we're headed in this direction. We could be headed in, a little slightly different direction, but nonetheless, when we're making future decisions about investments in infrastructure, is knowing that it could benefit us under a range of climate futures, or investments in water conservation could help offset the need to build more infrastructure, for example, and how the different scenarios could have different outcomes for, say, the benefit of conservation. That's kind of what we're looking at. And when it comes to the integrated component of it, well, historically, like Crystal said, we've really just focused on water supplies. So the next step that we want to do is really just looking at how can we balance demand management and supply management. So that is a more narrow focus or scope, Amy, than what you were describing. This really is still focusing on just municipal, like drinking water, I guess you could say. I think from that point, once we better understand our supply management needs, we would develop a supply and demand management strategy that would potentially look different than what we have right now. I think that could feed into a more broader integrated, like water resources plan that's looking at stormwater and source water and wastewater, but our next step is really just to focus on supply and demand management.
one other question on the conservation line now. I know that. Well, we've had something like a 30% per capita decline since '02 or something, which is probably a lot of low-hanging fruit, but. What would drive, you say major savings? Towards the end of there, would that be because the city puts a ban on outdoor watering or what? I guess I'm trying to get at, have we already gotten all the easy gains in conservation and for here on, it's gonna be kind of, flat, or are there opportunities for continuing significant gains from the conservation aid?
Yeah, so the majority of conservation we've seen so far, a lot of other communities have seen as well, even those that don't have aggressive water conservation programs. And it's really tied to indoor efficiencies, right? Toilets are way more efficient than they used to be. And that's something that people can't even go and buy an inefficient toilet anymore. Whenever they replace a mixture, it gets replaced with an efficient one. But when we're talking about like more aggressive long-term savings, that is heavily focused on landscape transformation. So converting from turf to maybe water-wise landscapes that don't require as much water. Also more aggressive, like real-time customer metering is something that we can leverage and communicate with residents so they understand, okay, I have a leak, I need to address this leak. Doing like campaigns to promote water conservation with that real-time data. Those types of approaches where it's a lot more visible in people's daily life that they're conserving water.
So we talked a lot about climate change, and I take it, is that the greatest source of uncertainty or driving these different scenarios?
I think that's the biggest driver.
So tell me also about other, I'm thinking about population growth, consumer behavior, or other technological change, which probably time frame is, but I'm just curious, how big a factor might they be going across these different scenarios?
Yeah, so one thing you mentioned is just like water demand overall, and that can vary dramatically when we're talking about new growth. And here we've just presented kind of one scenario based on certain assumptions. But in an integrated water supply plan, we can project more of a range of like, we don't actually know what 5,000 more people will live in. Will they live in single family homes or will they live in apartments? And how will that interact with demand? So we can dive into those details more, and I will qualify some of the data I give you all, just recognizing that future water demands are pretty hard to project these days.
Some of that's coming up in the next series of slides you have to correct.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
Foreshadowing.
Okay, so we took our 4 scenarios that I just described and ran those conditions through our water supply system model to identify where there was a surplus or gaps. As you all know, river conditions are extremely variable. So in one year, we could have way more water than what our community needs. But in a very dry year, we might not have enough and might need to restrict certain uses of water. Our overarching water supply policy is called our reliability criteria. It's essentially level of service tables. And they were established in 1988 and aim to balance the costs and environmental impacts of increased reliability with the consequences of temporary shortages. Right now, they dictate around 95% of the time, we'd want the system to be reliable enough not to require any sort of restriction. Then in some years, they allow for outdoor watering restrictions that range from lawns going dormant to landscapes dying. And in an extremely rare condition, we might consider indoor restrictions. For the 4 scenarios I just described, even if that scenario experienced a modeled shortage in 1 or a few years, as long as the shortages were less severe than the reliability criteria, that's considered a pass. So here's an example of a passing model run. This is a historical reference scenario using hydrology from 1915 to 2014. And the gray bar here represents average water demands associated with today's population, so no additional growth. And the blue water supply droplet represents the sustainable water supply available under that historical hydrology. When the demand bar is well below the water supply droplet, like we have here, that would indicate a surplus. And when the bar rises above the sustainable supply droplet, that would indicate a potential gap. So the demands represented in the gray bar under all future scenarios include a 10% factor of safety. And that factor of safety is important to encapsulate risks that can't be effectively modeled, like natural disasters and infrastructure outages. And as I mentioned previously, these demands have also been adjusted up for climate change and down for water conservation. And that volume of anticipated savings has been outlined in light gray and is just what's shown for reference there. Here we have all 4 future scenarios along with that historical reference scenario. As you can see, in 3 out of the 4 scenarios, there's sufficient supply to meet demands associated with Boulder's current population out to 2050. The severe scenario might look a bit intimidating, but those conditions would fundamentally alter the Western United States relationship with water, and Boulder is in a far better position than many other communities. We also anticipate that the community will continue to grow, and additional water demands out to 2050 based on current growth trajectories are shown in orange. We understand our current population water demands really well, but water demands tied to growth, particularly in Boulder, where infill and redevelopment is the primary mode of development occurring, can just be a lot more variable. That's one reason that we continuously monitor how our demands compare to our projections, and we report those changes in demand to you all each April. So based on this data, Boulder has a robust water supply that can reliably meet near-term demands that include anticipated growth. But there's still risks that should be considered when planning for the future. We may need to consider additional water supplies to maintain or improve our current risk profile, though the best path forward would really be determined in a future integrated water supply plan. So under a couple of those future scenarios, there's still surplus water that we can grow into. And our 2009 Source Water Master Plan encourages the use of surplus water for other benefits and recognizes that the city's surplus will decrease over time as the city grows. Boulder uses the majority of its water for municipal purposes, and the relative intensity of other uses are shown on the screen. When we talk about growing into our supply further, the primary non-municipal uses that would be reduced include agricultural leasing and water left in the stream for downstream users, and to a much smaller extent, water used for in-stream flow, only if we were to declare drought more often. And then there may be some situations where we have a water supply gap, and under those situations, we'd want to obtain new water supplies. Developing new supplies in our dry region involves a few trade-offs to consider and weigh against the benefits of additional growth. And I've laid out a few different levels to talk through. The stretch level encapsulates making our current supplies go further with water conservation, automation, changes to level of service, and recapture of reusable supplies. Some of these changes can be quick to implement, like changes to level of service goals, but others may take around 20 years. These types of improvements can be expensive and impact the environment. We're already actively working in this realm, but additional pressure from growth may warrant the need to pick up speed on many of these efforts. Partner means working collaboratively with others to develop or acquire new water supplies. These types of projects can be expensive, impact the environment, and may also impact neighbors who are trying to develop water. Compete is a level some cities are already operating at, but Boulder is not. It's really racing and bidding against others to develop or acquire new water supplies. This would be a big shift from Boulder's current policies and can be expensive, impact the environment, reduce supplies available to neighbors, and impact local agriculture. New water supply isn't unlimited, and it'll be hard to come by and take a long time to develop, but the smaller amount of new water we need, the better chance we can obtain it while limiting trade-offs and staying closer to those stretch and partner levels. Ultimately, where we fall within these levels is what an integrated water supply plan would establish. So a lot of information in one go around. To summarize some key points, water and land use are inherently linked, and the comprehensive plan provides an opportunity to identify water-related priorities and weigh trade-offs associated with water. Second, Boulder's in a good position with its water supply right now, and even considering moderate climate change and anticipated growth. But due to extreme uncertainty, there's still risks to its supplies that should be considered when planning for the future. And finally, the information presented today hopefully provided a sense of risks that can impact our water supply and trade-offs to developing new supplies, but much more detailed planning and clear next steps can come from an integrated water supply plan. So thanks for diving into the weeds a bit, and I'll pause a moment here if you have more questions for the team.
Well, a couple of just some observations for this is very impressive. I mean, I think you're really going about it. I think the scenario approach, my professional experience as a consultant is kind of one of the best approaches that's used. There are some really more sophisticated, crazy things, but I don't necessarily, it would be expensive to advise you go that way. So I think this is good. Couple thoughts. One is always on extreme scenarios. That's always hard because, there's a lot of assumptions that go in, but don't assume it's the worst case possible. Right? It could be worse. The probability of that would, by definition, be lower. But it's just always good to be thinking about more extreme situations. But it is good you have one in there. It strikes me as probably 30% drop by 2050. Strikes me as pretty good, pretty extreme. The other thing is, and don't repeat the mistake that I made over much of my career, is we tended to focus, climate change community is focused on these long-term average changes, but don't leave out variability. And we're seeing more, what one actually, Daniel Swain of live in Boulder, affiliated with UCLA, calls whipsaw. Extreme wet, extreme dry years, and particularly in California. I think they're seeing a lot of other places too. And I don't know, again, it's a question of how well the system can handle that. In Colorado River, multi-year supply is better able to do it, but if supplies are shorter, then we could have more shorter term droughts, flash droughts. Also, natural variability. And I'm not sure we're out of it. We've been found to be in a mega drought in the Southwest, multi-decade drought. Now, based on, I think Boulder seems to be doing pretty well, but nonetheless, it's not clear. These things can still happen. It could be affected by long-term climate change. It could happen for other causes, but I would advise thinking about variability as well.
I guess one thing from sort of this integrated perspective that you're kind of focusing and moving towards, seems like traditionally you probably focus a little bit more on the supply side and what are our options and what are the different sources and so forth. But in terms of trying to integrate that with demand, what kind of range of scenarios and data are you using to sort of project a population basically? I mean, I know there's several projects out there that could be in big chunks of additional demand in the future. And sort of what are the general assumptions that you've made in terms of just purely the population part of the driven, population driven part of the demand in the future?
So we get those numbers from our planning department. So they're the ones putting out those projections for population and employment. And what they're currently based on is the ones that we've used in this analysis here really is based on historical trends. So I think we're looking at about on average a 1% growth rate that Boulder's experienced over time. And the planning department looked at that historical growth rate, but they've also looked at other factors that might in the future affect whether that trend would change. And ultimately landed on, they think the 1 to 2% growth rate is appropriate. But that's where sort of the comp plan can be influential. So if there are significant land use changes identified in the comp plan or policies that would affect development, that could then affect what those population projections would look like in the future. So I think we want to see, where does this comp plan end up? Have the planning department make some new projections, and then we'll revisit that, our work again after that happens.
Other questions? So what's the game plan on this particular item then going forward? We're gonna revisit it again in a couple months.
Yeah, I believe the planning team will be looking at some of the policy things that I mentioned in August and in September. And council will be indicating the ones that they wanna really focus on. Some of those likely related to water, and so I would envision the team coming back sometime later this year to check in with the board on those types of things. We don't know exactly what that will be.
I think it's September, there will be a check-in with the planning department, and I think that's when they'll start presenting sort of some results of what we're seeing from the community engagement, and just get your feedback on policies or values you should be considering when developing alternatives. And also just a note, we're also going to council on July 31st to give a similar presentation to them, just so again, we provide, they have this foundational information about water supply that will inform some of their decision making when it comes to any policy changes that they may be wanting to make in the comp plan. And then after September, I think there will probably be another check-in from the comp plan team, probably early 2026. But I think we'll have that schedule nailed down a little bit more come September. You'll hear more about it then.
And the work on the integrated water plan, you said after comp plan?
Yeah, so the comp plan it's updated every 10 years, but it takes a couple years to update. So where are we, 2025? I think the goal is to have the comp plan complete by end of 2026. And then after that, we would start our work. So 2027, we would start our work.
Another observation. Go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Joel.
I was just gonna say that I think in some ways you're providing, so another way, there's a scenario approach, which I think you're doing a good job. The other approach is called stress test. We can just figure out how much of a change either in supply or demand starts to stress the system. I think you can back out on the supply, what I've seen, perhaps probably how much would be a problem. But it might be interesting to think about in terms of population growth or water use, whatever those things, just to see if there are rates of change, something that someone is that these do not sustainable, given everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, but for the scenarios that we ran, we didn't have a lot of time trying to provide information for this comp plan update, but I will say, there's a lot of questions people have, like how will administrative changes on the Colorado River affect our supply? Then there's climate change and so many variables. It's like, how do you capture, you can't capture them all. So I think that's the beauty of this
And I
scenario.
just
planning.
offer that as an
Yeah.
observation. No, I think that's a good job. And I think they can that figure answer my question on population versus supply.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's like it's irrelevant fact. So,
Anything else on this topic? And maybe?
Yeah, I also, just commend you for this. It's complicated. There's a lot of, potential ways this presentation could go, and you did a great job simplifying it and making clear kind of what the direction was. And I'm assuming, it sounds like you're gonna be using a similar presentation with council. Just one thing, and I also thought that your briefing for council was very clear and did a great job of explaining kind of where we are, providing the right amount of context. You might break up the text a little bit, given the audience, but I think it's, the narrative itself just nails it. I wonder if there isn't some way to help the council and also the RAB kind of understand where you're going with the integrated water supply plan in terms of outputs. So not, I know you can't produce them already because there's going to be all of this analysis, but like an illustrative example of what a map might look like that helps to quantify what demand is based on different land use patterns and what that kind of analysis might ultimately produce from a visual perspective. And I don't, that may be an impossible, but I think it would be helpful in understanding kind of the value of the integrated water supply plan as it is kind of a next step, but maybe not the ultimate step if you come to a conclusion that additional water resources, integrated water resources planning needs to be done as well.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. We'll give that some thought.
That's a great suggestion.
Okay, thank you very much for the very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
And we will move on to the next topic. It is matters from the board. I have one minor matter that I'm going to be out of the country at our meeting in September, so I've asked Amy to chair that meeting, which she has agreed to do. Sure. Okay, and thank you, Amy. Any matters from the staff?
Just one, and it's kind of a broader one. I just wanted to mention and acknowledge the devastating flooding that's happening around the country. And I know everybody shares, and the heart's going out to those communities and the people affected. And in the city of Boulder, with all the drainages and flood risk, there's such important work to be done. And our team takes that responsibility very seriously at all different levels. It affects our maintenance team, our capital projects team. And those capital projects are important, but some of them are very large scale and can take years, sometimes decades, to come to fruition. So it's really important, the community preparedness and just everyone in the city being ready and knowing what their options are and what to do in a flood and planning for that before it happens. And I shared a link with Joanna and Karen. Maybe we can put that in the chat tonight, but just felt to mention that. And I remember the 2013 flood year, and it's surreal when you see these natural disasters in other places in the country, but then when it's happening in our city, it's really devastating. And some of those images that we're seeing on the national news, that was happening in Boulder back then. So if you'd like, I can move to the upcoming.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, sure.
Let's see here. So as has kind of been our practice, doesn't necessarily have to be that way. August, we're not scheduled to have a meeting. Then in September, we have an action item, I believe, on rainwater policy. And we have an information item on water-wise landscaping policy and code update. Sounds like that might be combined with some discussion on the comp plan that Kim was just talking about. I would say October is a little bit more up in the air. we thought about doing an information item on the city's broadband efforts. Our utilities department is actually, there's a lot of similarities to what we do, and so the next phase of construction, we're actually lending some of our leadership support and have hired a few staff to help out, so might be good to share with the board at some point on that, if not October, maybe another time. And then working with Chris Douglas and his team and just the feedback from the board of the interest that you've had in seeing some of the projects. We're thinking about identifying another project for a tour possibly. And then I think kind of related to some of the discussion we were having during the CIP on the rate study and water budgets. I asked Joanna to do a brief update under upcoming schedule of what's coming up on those items.
Thank you. Let me turn on my camera real quick. Hi, again, I'm Joanna Bloom. I'm the technical host. I'm also Deputy Director of Policy and Planning. And thanks, Joe, for teeing up the item. So one of our 2025 work plan items is the combined evaluation of our water budgets and along with the rate study. And so we're splitting it into 3 phases, and phase 1 is kind of starting now. We're going to do some internal discovery with staff and begin some community engagement on their experience both with water budgets and rates. And primarily looking at, are the water budgets achieving the desired goals? Also, are they administratively sustainable in the long run? So pretty complicated, and so there's a administrative lift there as well. So we'll do that now, and we'll come to you in October with an information item that kind of lays out some of the themes that we've heard from that initial information gathering, and get some feedback from you all about what are some of the options that we could look at as we proceed. And then we'll come back in January and introduce some of the preferred options after doing some further analysis, kind of transition into official phase 2, which will focus more on rates. And then phase 3, timing TBD, will be implementation of whatever we land on, which depending upon what we land on will take longer or shorter. So stay tuned.
And the things we were talking about tonight, the comp plan, the policy updates, the rate study that we do every so often, those are things that the board will have a role weighing in on. We've had some years where there just hasn't been as much of that kind of thing, and I've even received some feedback from the board of like, wow, it seems like a lot of information items and not as much for us to act on. And I'm pleased that just the natural ebb and flow of the work plan, there'll be more. There should be a good work program for the board to chew on for the next few years. So that's what I have for upcoming schedule.
And we have meetings planned for November and December.
Maybe probably not December. That's one that we usually take a break just because of availability, but it's possible as things move around, we may need one in November.
Okay, anybody have anything else? I think I'll ask for a motion to adjourn the meeting then. A second? All in favor? All right. Thanks, Amy.